NaNoWriMo announcement video last week, I think I had this idea that come November the 1st, I was just going to be able to open up all my Scrivener files and just get straight to work. As I talked about in that video, 2 of the 3 projects I'm working on are ones that have already been started, and the third is the second book in a series. So I sort of felt that I'd done quite a lot of the planning I needed. I was just going to open the files, read through a bit of the previous session, and then just start typing new words. Now that sounds like a fantastic idea. I've got lots of other work to be getting on with in October. I've spent most of the month editing a completely different book. So I didn't want to spend loads of the month working on Preptober stuff. But as November has crept ever closer, I've started to realise that I do need to be a little bit more organised. So I have made myself a Preptober checklist of the things I really need to get done in this last week before November, and I'm going to see how far I can get. The first thing on my list was definitely finishing the first draft of Echo State, which is the second book in my Eidolon Division trilogy. As I said in my last video, I've written nearly 80,000 words of this and I've got about 20,000 left to write. This is the project that needs the least amount of planning. I can kind of remember where I got to in this story, and I also know that I wrote copious notes on how the last 20,000 words are going to go. So in this case, the prepping is pretty easy. I want to read back through the last few chapters that I wrote, which was probably in about August. I also want to read through the notes I made for myself about the end of the book and see if I want to make any tweaks. There may be more planning left to do as I go along, but that's a fairly standard part of my drafting anyway, so that won't be unexpected. And I can make time for that in November. I've got 2 other projects ahead though, and this is where it gets a bit more complicated. The second project I talked about is a short story called The Bone Roads. Now, I have finally looked at the draft of this story, which I last touched in July, and also the notes I left for myself. I wrote just over 700 words back in July, and I'm reasonably happy with them. I like the main character. His voice is very grumpy and sarcastic, and I think that'll be a lot of fun to write. I have, however, also looked at the notes I left for myself. First of all, they are rather sparser than I remembered. I have set out for myself a rough outline of how the story is going to go, and I've definitely got some notes for the ending, but the truth is I don't like them very much. Reading back over them now, the ending I had in mind doesn't fit the character very well and it feels pretty trite. I really think I could do something much stronger to fit this story better. So the prepping here is lots of brainstorming. I could just go into November with no more work than I've already done and just see how the story progresses as I draft it, but I would really like to have a bit more of a direction to go in. So what I'm going to do next is sit down and write out as many notes as possible. I love to do this by hand because I think I'm more creative that way and my brain just works differently. So I'm hoping that just by scribbling down as many thoughts as possible about this short story, I will come up with some much better ideas about how it's going to progress and how it's going to end. This is definitely the biggest challenge for me because I'm not great at writing short stories. I have a tendency to make myself a few notes and write maybe the first 2,000 words and then abandon them and literally never finish them. That's one of the reasons I do want to write this short story in NaNoWriMo, because I'm going to need those words to go towards my NaNoWriMo total, and hopefully that means I will actually finish a short story for once. And then we have got the third project, which doesn't really even have a working title at this point. It's the second book in an urban fantasy series, and I wrote the first book back in about March and April of this year. So this is the most traditional NaNoWriMo project because I am absolutely starting from scratch in November. I'm pretty excited about starting something new actually because it's a good 6 months since I drafted anything from the beginning. For this one, a lot of my preparation involves refamiliarizing myself with the first book. Now, the first book is very much subject to change. I have not edited it yet. As I said in my last video, I want to edit the first 3 books in this series back to back for continuity. But that means that I do not have a finished first book to look at. What I have instead is an outline. This shows both what I wrote back in the spring, and it's also got some notes on about changes I want to make. Some of these might also play into events in the second book, so I definitely am going to go over these with a fine-tooth comb. It is really the edit notes in this case which give me a better idea of where I thought the series was going to go than the first draft does. The first draft of the first book was written really quickly, and I know there are lots of things I want to change when I edit it. Because I've already made notes of those, I can just read through them and pick up where I left off. I'm also going to read the last chapter of that book. It was a bit of an epilogue where the main character talks to a character who's going to become integral to the rest of the series. And I'm absolutely sure I left myself some clues in that last chapter about where book 2 is going to go. And the final thing is more brainstorming. In this instance, I already know the world and the characters. So whilst I might flesh those out a little bit, they don't need too much work, which leaves 2 main things to work on. One is the character arc for the main character Evie, because I really want to think about how she's going to change from the end of the first book into the second book and then going on through the rest of the series. That's something that's really important when you've got a long-running series with a single main viewpoint character. The other thing, and this is the really fun bit for me, is brainstorming the plot. I have a vague idea about where the larger arcs of this series could go. There could easily be 10 or 12 books with what I have worked out already. But all I want to focus on right now is the plot of the second book. I particularly want to think about where the book is going to start, and that's right down to the details of the first scene in the first chapter. But then I want to come up with things like a midpoint and an ending so that I know what I'm working towards. But basically I'm going to keep working on this planning and brainstorming until the start of November. The more work I do on it now, the easier it will be to dive into it in the middle of the month. Because of course I will have finished 1 other novel and 1 short story by the time I get to this urban fantasy. There is every chance I'm going to be feeling a bit drained by the time I get to it. And in order to perk up my enthusiasm halfway through the month, I'm going to need lots of really fun plot points to write. So there is my Preptober work. Finally snuck in right at the end of October because I do always leave these things to the last minute. I'm going to keep working on this over the last few days of the month, but we are really close to November now and I can't wait to start drafting again. I hope your preparations have gone well and you are looking forward to NaNoWriMo. I'll be back with my NaNoWriMo vlogs very soon. In the meantime, keep writing everyone, and I'll see you next time.